Universe.
Greetings, I'm Shad.
And greetings, I'm Tyron.
And recently we have a new series inspired by Brandon Herrera's Darwin Awards, where he looks at gun fails, and we've been looking at sword fails.
We have, yes.
And you know something I've realised when we're looking at those sword fails?
What's that?
Some people do not know a thing about sword safety.
Some people are idiots.
Yeah. And
I've just realised that.
That's prompted this video where we are going to share what I think are some of the at least fundamental principles of sword safety.
Right.
I'm going to go through the list, I'll list them off to you and then go into detail each one, elaborating and explaining a bit more. And kind of interesting thing about this, right? I never had to be taught these things.
Well, you got to keep in mind, when you start handling a sword, you're going to intrinsically do some of these things. Because there's a lot more transferable skills from, let's say, like a knife. And most people, in a general sense, handle knives from when they're a kid to when they're an adult. You use them to cook, you use them to eat. And because it is a bladed weapon, you can kind of, some basics.
Yes.
Don't point it at somebody. Don't, cut something that you don't want to.
Don't hand it to someone blade first or something like that.
Whereas something like a gun or maybe some sort of projectile, there's not really a lot of crossover except with other projectile things.
Well, the other interesting thing is that I find there is been a bit of a lack of, emphasis on sword safeties because they're not as deadly as guns. They can be deadly, but when an accident happens with a gun, a life can be lost pretty easily. An accident happens with a sword, you can end up with a cut, sometimes a very severe cut.
I would say that they're different in their lead up. A gun is very instant. It can be accident. You're just pointing it somewhere. It can go off. There's a lot more there. With a sword, I think it takes a lot more effort to actually really do something stupid. Whereas you would think, at least, in that lead up, somebody would go, hey, maybe we shouldn't do that,
Yeah.
I feel like that's the difference there. A gun is very instant.
Yeah. And so the list that I have here, and this is just an intuitive list that, as I think about it, these are the obvious main ones, okay? I'm going to list them here, and then we're going to go into more detail. And so, first one, do not swing around a wall hanger, mole ninja piece of trash. Don't swing it around. Don't use it like a sword. Don't pretend, don't hit anything with it, all right? And so that's like a base. If you're going to want to use, something as a sword, it needs to be an actual sword.
A sword, yeah.
Okay? When unsheathed, never hold it pointed sideways.
Okay, yep.
Okay? Kind of straightforward. Never swing at anything you don't want to destroy, if it's a real sword.
Right,
okay? Yep. Never practice new moves with a sharp blade.
Yep.
Okay? Like, when I say new moves, ones that you're very unfamiliar with. All right? Never swing in the direction of a limb.
Okay.
If your sword has an edge, always treat it like it's sharp. The next one is always check what's behind you and what's above you if you're going to be swinging it around. And lastly, hold it tight and in two hands if new, I would almost say.
Okay, all right.
So, a couple of those, those are the list. Those are the list.
All right, so that is an interesting list. And I do think that there's a caveat here. And I think this is why there's never been like a rule set for swords, is because some of those rules you break when you're training. And so there's caveats with it. And I feel like when it comes to rules, you'd never really want the caveats. Like with a gun, don't point it at someone unless there's no caveat there.
Yes.
With swords, it's like, well, don't swing it at something you don't want to hit. But it's like, well, when I'm training, for example, with these blunt trainers, I will swing them at Shad. So,
well, you've actually hit something interesting as well. There are different types of swords, right? Tyreth and I are holding blunt trainers, all right? There will be different rules associated with these.
Yeah.
And unlike a gun, right, you can't tell if it's loaded or not just by looking at it. It might be, it might not. You need to actually check it.
Yeah.
Where I can tell if this is sharp or not just by looking at it. And not only that, I'm not going to mix this up with one of my sharp swords.
Yes.
I know what this looks like. I know this is my blunt one. And so the rule, always treat it like it's sharp, doesn't apply to this exact sword because I know it. And I simply know it's not sharp at all.
Yeah.
That's why the rule, like, if it has an edge, treat it like it's sharp.
Yeah.
Okay? So there are some caveats about this.
And I do think that that's why we've never really had like a strict rule set that everybody learns, is because like for example, Nate's a good example of this. Everybody knows Nate, everybody loves Nate.
Yes.
When he first came here, he had never really had any experience with a sharp sword. So he wasn't trained in using one. So the rules that he may have at his HEMA club or something like that would not be the same rules because they're not using sharps.
Yeah, and that's actually an interesting point. If you're like only ever used blunt, safe swords, they're a different thing when it compares to sharp ones, and I'll go get one. So here is a sharp sword, and instantly my behavior and awareness of the blade is vastly different, especially with Tyrant near me, and I think even your kind of wariness is also like, we were very comfortable with the blunt ones. We know they're safe, we know they're, blunted at the tip. This is very pointy, okay, and sharp. And so if I'm holding this sideways, just like this, suddenly that's a bit of an issue.
Yes, it is.
Right? So we have an example here of a wall hanger. Now, this isn't trash. It's a beautiful, I consider it beautiful. It's the Anduril.
It looks pretty. This thing is trash. This thing is like...
As a sword, it's trash, yes.
Yes,
but
as
it's not,
a sword.
As a replica wall hanger, it's not trash. It's pretty.
It weighs literally double what a normal sword should weigh.
Well, that right there is an important point to this rule, is that's why you shouldn't swing it around, because it's far more unwieldy and much greater chances of you losing control and hitting something. The other thing is, it's a vastly more dangerous sword-like object than a real sword.
Because this is not constructed like a real sword.
Not made to handle the vibrations or the impacts. It's not made to be as durable. It very likely has what's called a rat tail tang. The tang is the bit of steel that is connected to the blade that runs through the handle, being connected to the pommel. And because it's not meant to be functional, it just needs to be attached. And so the tang's are usually called a rat tail, which is really thin. And as a result, high chance of breaking if you ever hit something with that blade. This is actually, even though it's not sharp, is in some ways more dangerous than this real sharp sword I'm holding here.
That's true. And then there is another category of sword. Now this one doesn't really fit into a neat box because it has a very niche use, and that is actually, this is made of aluminum. This is light. This thing is used in a lot of stage combat, maybe movies, things like that, because you don't have to deal with the real weight of a sword, but it is constructed pretty similarly to a sword, so it can be used in a similar way.
Yeah.
I just wanted to bring this one out as well because, like we said, there's not really one rule set because there's so many different types of swords and different uses for them.
And because this
I'm sick of holding this thing. I don't want to hold this anymore.
It's heavy. Because the aluminium sword is actually made to be swung around, okay, it's much safer than swinging around like a real sword.
Yes. This thing here, the biggest danger, I would say, is actually just this point. If I was to hit you with the point, that's dangerous because it's metal. But apart from that, it doesn't really do much damage.
You can, entertain swinging it towards someone because it's made to be used in, stage combat, reenactment, stuff like that. But a lot of the other rules do actually apply for that. For instance, like checking what's around you when you're swinging around, and a lot of other ones. But this first one about if you're going to be swinging something around, make sure it's made for it, is an important one. So don't swing around Mall Ninja or wall hanger crap, okay? So the next rule is in relation to how you, hold or handle a live blade, a sharp blade, when it's out of the sheath. And if you've been paying attention, look at how I've been holding it, okay? I've been making sure the tip is not pointed at anyone. It's either up, or if I was going to be extra safe, I'd be holding it like this, okay? Out of the way. And so part of it is, never hold it sideways, or be stupid like this, or like that, right? But it also means pay attention to where that sword is pointing at all times when you have a live, sharp sword out of the sheath.
Yeah, I would agree. You kind of just do this, like when you start training, you'll just do it anyway. So when you handle a live blade, you'll do the same sort of thing. Yeah. A lot of the, I would say, safety is transferable between just like a blunt or a normal, like you just do them anyway, right?
Yeah. And even though I'm being very wary of the blade and stuff like that, this is kind of one of the differences between guns and swords and everything, where swords aren't as lethal as guns. And so I know how sharp this blade is, and so I can actually, know to a certain level of what is safe enough with, this is sharp. I could chop a pool noodle in half with it, but even within, I know the level of where the edge is. And so part of it is, being aware of how much damage a sword can do based on the edge it has, and just being mindful of it, I guess.
Yep.
All right, this next one is similar to kind of a gun rule, which is, and I think it's a good one, honestly, never swing it at anything you don't want to destroy.
Yes. That's a fair one for a live blade.
For a live blade specifically.
Yeah, and I think this is where people, because I remember when we did the first sword fails video, a lot of people were coming up with rules, and it's not like the rules were bad. It's just one of those things, like there is the caveat that there are different blades for different purposes.
Yes, exactly. But when it comes to a sharp one, this is pretty good because so many people, as we've seen in the fails video, goof around and they're swinging at either towards a limb or a friend who's holding something or anything like that, and they need to be aware, worst case scenario, this sharp blade will hit that person in the worst case, of course. And you need to be aware, if that's not your intent, if you do not want to cut the thing you're swinging at, don't swing towards them.
Yeah, it should be simple and everybody should understand, but apparently not.
There are idiots in the world, okay? Or people that just do not really understand how dangerous they can be when used improperly.
I don't believe that. Because everybody knows how a knife works, and what, they think a sword is different somehow? It's worse.
We've seen them like hold something in their mouth and swing. It's just like
people
bonkers.
are idiots. What do you want me to say? Like, legitimately, if you're swinging a live blade at another human being that you are not trying to kill, you're an idiot. There we go.
This one is related to this rule, okay? But I think it deserves its own emphasis because, like, there are times where people think that they're not swinging at something that they want to hit, but they're still swinging towards a limb or something like that. And we've seen accidents happen where in the fails video, he's holding the watermelon and he doesn't think he's swinging, trying to destroy his arm, but is still swinging towards a limb, and that can be a recipe for disaster, as we saw. But in terms of swinging towards them, like, I think if people are dual wielding and they'll crossover, sometimes there's they can get in the way, and we saw that in the video.
How often do you see people dual wielding with actual live blades? Like, what's the purpose of that? Because usually when you use a live blade, it's going to be in training or something. When you use dual blades, it's usually going to be in training circumstance. What circumstance would you use a dual live blade?
Dual live blade.
Exactly.
Right.
It's hard to think of these stupid scenarios because they should.
And so the one that, of course, is when they're trying to hold the target or something like that, and they're then swinging towards it, and it's like, don't hold the thing that you're trying to chop with your hand, okay?
Simple. It's super simple.
So, next rule is when you're practicing something new for the first time, don't do it with a sharp live blade, okay?
Sure.
Why?
Well, there's a kind of a caveat in there as well, because what if you're learning a new cutting technique?
I know, but usually you've already gone through the motion. So I do think if you are trying like a new cutting form, like say you want to try and practice a reverse edge cut, you should be practicing that movement where you're here and you're going down in the reverse edge where strike like that, and you should practice a number of times in training. When I train, I'm always training with a blunt sword, okay? This is a synthetic trainer. You can do it with foam swords or steel blunts, okay? And my drills are always with, blunt swords and going through the motions, right? Practicing this so you're familiar with it. And that means when you get the sharp live sword in your hands, you've already got those movements on your muscle memory, and very low chances when, because it can, I've only ever hit myself in training, practice with a sword, once in my entire life. But it can happen, right? Well, I was going too fast, lost track of the blade, and something happened and hit me in the face.
Forgive me, I have not experienced this. The closest thing is like nunchucks. You can hit yourself with nunchucks, but they are an articulated weapon.
But when you're trying to go fast, speed up, and then you're starting to mix up different movesets and things, and if you're trying to include more complex things like flourishing, not for like combat, but just for performance stuff, that's when mistakes can happen more likely. And so, I don't, why would you, who would ever do that with a sharp blade? I've seen people goof around though, trying to do cool moves with sharp blades for the first time, and they haven't practiced those moves, and then they hit themselves and they bleed.
Practice.
With
it's very
something
simple.
safe.
Yeah.
Don't do practice with a sharp sword.
And a lot of people, I want to mention this, you don't need fancy, expensive steel or that. A stick works fine.
Oh, yeah.
Most people start with a stick.
And when I say practice, I'm talking about practicing the moves, because cutting practice is a real thing, and you do that with a sharp sword, but you should have practiced the cuts, right? Like this, with a safe, blunt trainer before you start to actually use that sharp thing. Just so even at the basic kind of standard cut, you should do with something safe, and you should practice it beforehand.
A stick, a literal stick. If you know the movements, or if you've looked at the movements, you can still do the exact same movements with a stick. You don't need a fancy sword.
The purpose of that, it gets on your muscle memory then, and therefore much lower chances that when you are going around, you might accidentally hit or misangle something, because some of these movements can become complex, especially when you're incorporating the back edge. And so there's a chance where, you might accidentally slice up, or when you're going around and you might come in and hit there. Also, another big thing, if you're untrained with it and you don't know how to angle the crossguard, that crossguard can hit your hand and pop out.
That's a valid one, actually. Yeah, I agree with that one.
And so, because I've trained a lot with crossguards, I actually know intuitively where to angle it so it doesn't hit the wrist when I'm tipping it back. And so that's why you can do ones like this. People might not realize how, I guess, much I'm directing this. When it goes around like this, see here, I have to angle it so it's not going to hit my wrist. And so I'm going like that. And you see that? That is actually something I'm doing intentionally. If you're not aware of it, people have often hit the wrist there, flies right out. And so this movement is far more complex than people realize. So I'll get you to stand back, right? We're just doing this, okay? This is all about practice, training, and I'm actually manipulating that crossguard constantly to avoid hitting my wrist. All right, this next one. If your sword has an edge, always treat it like it's sharp. Now, when I say edge, people might not, because like our trainer, that does not have an edge. I don't really need to treat it like it has an edge, right?
Okay, this one comes down to, because we have a lot of swords, maybe some people don't realize that they're not razor sharp most of the time. They're just sharp. And what happens is there are times, like this one here, you can run your finger on it, you can do all that, and it's not gonna cut you. But if I was to swing at someone, it would cut them.
Let me get one as an example. This is my Lockwood, one of my favorite swords, and I've never sharpened it. When it was originally purchased, it was sharp. If I could get you to hold this, right? Now, as a result, this blade is not sharp. Like, look, I can actually kind of push and drag it on my palm, and it is effectively blunt. The thing is, though, it still has enough of an edge that if I swung this with intent at someone, I could actually do some serious damage with it. And as well, it has a vicious, deadly point on it as well. And the reason why I never sharpened it is because it's one of my most expensive swords, and I don't want to do it until I know how to do it without scuffing the blade anymore or damaging it in any way. I'd be very precise in maintaining this and putting an edge back on it. But as a result, this is the perfect type of sword that, even though I know it's pretty darn blunt, in regards to general use, I'm going to treat it the same as a sharp sword in terms of not pointing towards anyone. Like I said, when swung with intent, even a blunt sword, if you know how to do it right, you can do damage with.
Yeah.
And so still treat it with the respect as if it is a live blade.
Yeah.
The next one, always check what's behind you and what's above you. Okay? And so, simple thing, but a lot of noobs who are unaware of that, like we've seen people smash, either windows or lights or anything like that. And this is why I think this one in particular is like, people who are familiar with knives still can make a big error with this because, they know not to point at anyone, but they're not used to such a long blade. And so they think, coming back, like they don't realize how much this blade can extend behind and potentially hit someone.
Yep.
Especially on these, like oftentimes people will go for a big strike, and this extension right there could be devastating if you hit someone.
Yeah.
So always check you're clear behind and you're clear above.
Yep.
Okay? So this next one is an interesting one. Like, I've seen too many people not hold their sword strong enough, and so when they swing, they let go and it flies out of their hands.
Grip, yeah.
A weak grip. And so hold it tight.
I've got one that's kind of adjacent to this, and that is sometimes having oils on your hands, even a slight little bit, because that usually when you have a sword wrap, they're made of a nice soft leather, it can actually get quite slippery. And once you start using your sword and your hands start sweating, it actually can be a bad combination.
Yeah.
So I would say try and have a strong wrist, and always, if you've got sweat on your hands, you've got oil, just clean them quickly, make sure that your hands are always got some grip.
And another one that we didn't list in the first one, but I think is important, is related to check what's behind you and what's above, is also, if you're swinging a sword, never have anyone standing in the line of that swing. Because if you accidentally let go, or if there's a break and the blade flies forward, it could hit someone.
Yeah.
Okay, and so make sure. I would say what line of fire is clear.
Sure, yeah.
Would be the way to phrase this one, which is just the line of attack, I would say. And so we're very mindful when we do that here, especially if we're hitting something solid and testing it a destruction thing. It's like we stand clear and pay attention to where a breakage might fly to.
Yeah.
And so those are all the primary things. Now, I never needed anyone to really spell these out for me, okay? Because we're not idiots. You can figure out, but unfortunately, there are people who just aren't paying attention, and it would be good if they knew these things.
Sure, but some of these are like, maybe, because we have so much exposure to them, and a lot of people probably watching have a lot of exposure to them, they train with them, they are far more aware of them. However, a lot of these fails, at least from what I've seen, are a lot of people who just buy a sword off the internet and go, I've got a cool sword, I'm going to now swing it around.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, if you buy a new sword, I get it, but they can be dangerous.
Exactly. But these are the fundamental sword safety rules as I would list them. And let us know what you think in the comments below. And also, if you're interested, you can check out some of these fails where these people, they needed to know these rules. They would have saved themselves from some nasty injuries if it was the case. So check it out there. And thank you for watching this video. Until next time, farewell.
And remember, a stick works just as well.
Stick good.
Stick good.